Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8 of Mountaineers Books web series. My name is Doug Canfield, and today our guest is elite climber Andy Kirkpatrick. And partnering with us on today's event is Moja Gear, the online climbing hub. Moja Gear sells climbing equipment and also has just a ton of interesting climbing content on its website. You can check them out at mojagear.com. And I think you'll find lots of interesting things to see there. If you've arrived here today through an invitation from Moja Gear, welcome. We're really glad to have you. Our presenter, Andy Kirkpatrick, is known for his big wall and winter climbs. He has, for example, climbed El Capitan in Yosemite more than 30 times, including 5 times solo and twice in a single day. Andy is also an award-winning author whose writing is frequently noted for his humor. His climbing adventures, Psycho Vertical and Cold Wars, were the first 2 that Mountaineers Books published in the US. And then recently we published the US edition of his book of climbing advice. It's called 1001 Climbing Tips. This particular book is a Banff Book Festival winner for Best Guidebook, where one of the competition judges described it as, quote, a laugh on virtually every page, but also some extremely useful advice. We can't get to all 1001 of those tips today, but we left the door open for Andy to give us the tips and stories to go with them. Andy lives in Ireland, but he's speaking to us today from England, where he's staying. They're 7 hours ahead of us, so it's evening where he is, at least 7 hours ahead of Seattle, where I am. Andy will talk for about 30 minutes, and after that, he'll answer any questions you may have. While he is presenting, by the way, feel free to type your questions in the box that you'll see at the right side of your screen. You can type those anytime, and then we'll be all set up to go when he ramps down his presentation. One last thing about our presenter. Climbing Magazine described Andy as a climber with a, quote, strange penchant for the long, the cold, and the difficult, with a reputation for seeking out routes where the danger is real and the return is questionable, pushing himself on some of the hardest walls and faces in the Alps and beyond. So let's get started. Andy, you got it. Take it over.
Right. Okay. Is this working? Can you hold? Can you hear me? Hey, Leo.
This is Webster. I'm one of the producers. Andy, you are on. We can hear you.
Okay. Right. So right. I'll just see if I can forward this slideshow. Oh God, what's happening now? Maybe Webster, you'll have to forward on the slideshow a little bit there. So I guess I thought I'd talk a little bit about my kind of background, really, which is kind of unusual in the UK. I didn't grow up near the mountains, which is like most people I know kind of grew up climbing the mountains. Grew up near mountains, and they went to university and met other climbers and things. I didn't really do that. So I until the age of I actually grew up in one of the flattest areas of the UK, a place called Hull, which is kind of but people say like the 60s didn't arrive in Hull until the 90s, and I lived there in the 90s, and that's not true. Oh God, I can't. Sorry, let me move this thing on there. 1 second now. Keep us. Sorry, technology. I'll try and. That's it. So I'm in the Lake District, which is it's like going back in time here. So right, that's it. Okay, so oops. Is that one? Oh God, sorry. That's the wrong keynote. Sorry. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, hope you can see that. So yeah, so I grew up in a place called Hull, which is famous for whaling and and it's where William Wilberforce came from, who was the man who began like the abolition of slavery. So it's got an interesting past. But I guess before that, I actually my father was in the Air Force, so from a very early age, we kind of moved around all over the place. And I did actually, until I was at the age of 5, I lived quite close to the sea and the mountains in Wales, which is in like mid Wales. So it was like very idyllic early childhood where I was like living, and as a 5-year-old child, like total freedom. I could walk out the door and go like walking around all by myself, and a few times I actually went missing, and the whole army camp had to go out looking for my dead body, and they had to, you know, looking in lakes and this kind of stuff, and I'd always turn up again. So, but I think it's like this very early, I had a lot of freedom as a child, which I think children these days don't get. Maybe in the US, maybe kids have more of an old-fashioned kind of childhood. I don't know, but I had this like total freedom. You live a bit near the sea, you live near the mountains. My dad was a professional kind of a climbing instructor, I guess. He was like outward bound instructor in the military, so he was taking guys out, making them swim in the sea early in the morning and all this kind of stuff. He was actually a physical training instructor, so it was a bit like the guy like Lee Ermey out of Full Metal Jacket. So he was kind of, I guess he was kind of a tough kind of character, and I always have this thing, like I knew he went away on expeditions and things. He'd go away, like he went off and climbed. Like I only found out recently that he climbed Half Dome, and he climbed loads of Mount Robson. He went to all these like mountains. I only found out recently where he actually went climbing. But he'd go away climbing, and then he'd be gone for like a month, and he'd come back. So I had this kind of a sort of inkling about the outdoors and climbing and all this kind of stuff up to the age of 5. Then when I was 5, my parents split up, and my mum took me to go and live in this place called Hull, which is, as I say, it was kind of run down. This is like the 1970s. You had Margaret Thatcher was in power. You had strikes. You had you know, like power cuts and all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of grim. And I think the shock of going to live in Hull was kind of profound, really. I went from living, you know, in this absolutely idyllic place as a child to living in a block of flats, council. So this is council housing, which I guess in America is like social housing. And I actually lived in the top floor of this block of flats, and the previous tenant of this block of flats had committed suicide. He'd like hung himself, so no one wanted to live in this flat. And so that's one reason why my mum got this flat, because in the UK there's always a big waiting list for people to get council accommodation. But if someone's killed themselves in a house, no one wants to, you know, live there. Amityville Horror was out at the same time. That had something to do with it. So we could actually, I don't know if it was just my imagination, but he hung himself on the banister, which was banister of the stairwell, which was literally 3 feet from my bed. And so it's quite interesting. This person killed himself. I had no idea who he was, but it seems to have had like an effect on my whole life, really. But I often joke that from a very early age I knew about like death and ropes and all this kind of stuff from this thing. Anyway, so I've always been kind of interested about suicide from this. Don't want to be morbid, but it's kind of always found that kind of interesting, that person. Anyway, so yeah, so growing up in a block of flats, it was kind of grim. I remember once my brother like locked me in a cupboard, as his brothers do, and I realised there was a rat like in the cupboard, and which is kind of, you know, things like that stay with you forever. Those kind of things. It's very mouldy. These flats were like prefabricated, and eventually they all got knocked down. They were called like the misery masonettes, and you learn like a lot of interesting skills. You learn about spitting, like if you want, you're probably quite good if you're going to be in the army. You know, if you spit, you know how to time it right to hit someone who's 4 floors down. You know, the stairwells are always not a good place to hang around. People were always full of like people sniffing glue and all this kind of stuff, and you know, punk was big at the time. So, but one interesting thing about growing up there was because I had this like it was kind of like it was like a concrete jungle, And but at the same time, like when you're a child, you have this amazing ability to make the most of something. Like when you go to Africa or places like, you see kids who seem so happy and they seem to be able to adapt. And I think like maybe that adaptation is one of the really good skills of growing up there. And it was before like health and safety, so the things we used to get up to was like kind of crazy, really. Someone said that I was once at the Banff Film Festival, and someone said how the like wilderness is an area of like 10,000 square miles or something where there's no McDonald's or whatever. So, but like growing up in this place, you kind of created your own wilderness. Like we used to playing all these like bombed out buildings where they'd all been destroyed in the Second World War. Like Hull was like really heavily bombed in the war. And you found all these like fun games of climbing in old derelict buildings and this kind of stuff. And the house itself, the block of flats, some crazy planner had actually decided to name them all after lakes in the Lake District, which is where I'm at right now. So ours was called Buttermere House, and you had all these different, it was like this. It was like a really stupid, it was like a really sick joke, really. So we used to go swimming in the docks, and I remember every year kids would drown, and the school teachers would tell us not to go swimming in the docks. But it was, because it'd be basically we were just old docks, and there was no ships in there, but it was pretty polluted. But it was like really exciting, to go swimming in the docks and have these adventures. And like one really early memory was of tying my brother had a bike, and I tied a rope to it and threw it into the dock and didn't realize it was tied to a rope, and he screamed off, went off home crying and stuff. So so growing up was kind of it's one of these things where you look back and you could pretend it was actually quite grim, but I think at the time I actually quite enjoyed it, and it sort of showed me, it taught me like a lot of skills for later on in life. Like it made me like it was very cold in these flats. Like you had to, sometimes you go to bed with all your clothes on, so you have to put them on in the morning. So years later, when you're in like Alaska in the winter time, or in Patagonia or somewhere like that, those are good skills to, maybe like fortitude as well, maybe. And maybe the most important skill was to realize that when you grew up in a very poor circumstances, you have very few opportunities, and you realize that everyone around you is actually, their lives aren't really going to change that much. Like education doesn't really work out. No one's going to go to university. No one's really going to make much of their lives. It's just going to be the same. Like most people are unemployed anyway. So the idea of like opportunities, and I guess later on in life I realized that through climbing it created opportunities, and that was one reason to climb, was just to make your life, change your life. So anyway, so I wasn't very good at school. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't tell the time, I couldn't tie my shoelaces, I couldn't do like a lot of things that everybody else could do. And again, like one of these things, as you get older, like people tell you things which you wish they'd told you earlier on. And it wasn't long ago, my mum told me that, she took me to the doctors when I was really little, because she realized I wasn't, only when my brother was born, who was younger than I was, that she realized that I wasn't a normal child. I didn't learn to do a lot of things that he could do. But it was only when I was 19, I was like unemployed, and for some reason I went for this test, and I found out I was like really dyslexic. And I don't even know if I really believe in dyslexia anymore. Like I feel like once I was diagnosed having dyslexia, and it was like kind of quite extreme dyslexia, in that I was given these two tests, and one of them I got 15% right, and the other one I got 99% right, which showed there was a very big disparity between the two halves of my brain potentially. And so the guy who was examining me said, "Oh, you need to get a job that involves like three-dimensional problem solving." So I got a job in a cardboard box factory. That's not true, but it's kind of a funny joke. But yeah, so I guess like once I found out I was really dyslexic, I guess I always use that as a reason for the way I was. But I think now I've got older, I don't really see it the same way. Like I see people often ask me about dyslexia because a lot of people seem to have it these days. But I always say it's like whatever it is, whatever's wrong with me, isn't wrong with me at all. It's like it's actually, I call it superlexia. Like it's whatever people like to think that people have a problem, but often, you know, if your son was born gay or something, like what are you going to do? Like give someone some tablets to make them straight or whatever? Like it's the way people are is the way they are, and to give it a name and say it's a problem is never a good idea, because you can't ever change. So my son, I was told my son had attention deficit syndrome and he should go on Ritalin and all this kind of stuff. And when I was told this, it was in a meeting where we saw this child psychologist, and when we went to the room, she said like, "Yo, you go and play with this Lego over here." So the woman's like telling us about he's got attention deficit syndrome. But I wasn't really listening to what she was saying, so I was actually looking at the Lego he was playing with, which was like really good quality Lego. So I don't call it attention deficit syndrome. I call it attention focus syndrome, which means if you have ADHD, you can focus better than anybody else, but only on what you're interested in. So I don't think it is a bad thing, that kind of thing. And actually, I've climbed with people who were absolutely terrible at school. And I remember climbing the Troll Wall with these two Norwegians, and one of them had skied, the first person to ski down Everest, and the other one had skied to and from the South Pole. And all of us were terrible at school. And I just think school wasn't like the right place for us, really. So I managed to get through school, and I guess what I had going for me, I had a good imagination. That was the saving grace. And I also really liked drawing. Like I was really good at art. Like from the very first moment, I kind of could hold a pencil or a crayon, I started drawing. And I probably drew almost every single day of my life when I was growing up. And through images, that's how I actually learned to read, because I didn't learn to read until I was probably about 13. But I absolutely loved comics. I used to have, like hundreds and hundreds of comics. Like my mum was kind of poor, but we had enough money for comics. So I had like cupboards full of comics, and I never knew what any of the words meant. I just kept looking at the pictures, and even now there's like a character who's called Rogue Trooper, and I thought it was called Regu Trooper and things like this. So slowly I wanted to actually read. I wanted to actually read what was in these comics, because I'd read them like hundreds of times, but without never actually reading them, just looking at the pictures. And then slowly, when I was about 13, I started being able to read, and it was an amazing thing. And I think, like for me, I often feel like words have a lot more meaning to me, because it was like if someone was blind and then they suddenly were able to see, then everything they'd always remember that being blind. And I think, I never take words for granted. So, even now, like whenever I read something, or I don't know, words have a lot of power that a lot of people don't seem to appreciate. So words like led into other things. Some of these slides, I have no idea what these slides mean. Red Bull, what would that be about? Anyway, oh yeah, Red Bull, yeah, words, yeah, Red Bull. It's interesting that you think about it. What does it mean? It's like so. Yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of interesting that I have actually become known as a writer, but I don't know what a verb is. I don't know what an adverb is. I don't know what a present imperative is, and all these things. Like my kids know what all these things are, but it makes me, I can't spell either. I'm terrible. I don't know. I still spell because wrong, and I don't know why that is. I think it's because I'm not interested in learning how to spell it properly. Again, it's like attention focus thing. I don't see the, obviously it's not that important to know how to spell because the spell check will check it anyway. So, but yeah, so it's kind of funny to end up being having a job as a writer and writing for magazines, and I've written quite a few books and things. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that you don't actually know what a verb is. But it just shows you that writing's not about spelling or all that kind of stuff. It's about something else. Like I've been I do quite a lot of work with like violent kids. Kind of quite violent kids. So you go to these schools where the kids are all locked in, and they have like one adult per child. So you only have a school where you have like 20 kids in it, and to get in there you have to open all these doors and stuff. It's kind of a bit scary to begin with. And but yeah, I often talk to kids about writing. Like writing is not like they always, when I talk to kids who have problems, like they often tell me that the teachers are like, oh, these kids might get really violent, or they might like start kicking off, like don't worry about it. But they never do. And I wonder if it's like, I talk quite quickly, so maybe that's why. Maybe I don't talk like a teacher, like I talk to them like I talk to anybody else. And so yeah, so maybe that's why. But I often say to the kids, like, do you like writing? And they're like, no. And they're like, do you like stories? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, well, writing is just stories. It's just a different name for it. So anyway, so yeah, I quite like writing. Anyway, so yes, I think when you have no like you have no real formal education in writing, it leads to, you see writing in a different way. Like you start. I think when you've written for long enough, you start. Like I had this thing where I once said I was going to stop writing because I didn't make any money out of it, and I think I got sick of seeing Bear Grylls books everywhere, and I just like, what's the point of really writing all the time, because you don't make any money out of it, and it's just wastes all your time. But so I told everybody I was going to stop writing, but then I realized you can't stop writing. It's like saying I don't make any money out of playing the guitar or playing football or riding my bike. It's something it's not about the money. It's about something you love doing. So I ended up I had to go back and keep writing again. So it's like everything I thought about was coming through like the mind of a writer, really. So anyway, so I should have some climbing slides here, but I don't seem to have any. So anyway, so I left school and didn't go to university, didn't go to college. I just went on the dole, which is was that welfare? It's on welfare. And then when I was about 19, I moved to London and I got a job in like an outdoor shop, because I had this sort of childhood kind of experience of the outdoors. I got this job in an outdoor shop, and then I started meeting climbers and outdoory people, which was kind of cool. And I realized that a lot of them were just were actually very intelligent people, and they had degrees and PhDs, and they were very bright, but they were just like working in a climbing shop, same as I was. And I realized like I never really met anybody who wasn't from where I was from, and these people I would have said they were quite posh in the past, but they weren't. They were actually they were just like me. So that was interesting. And then so from there I started actually getting interested in going to the outdoors. To begin with, I was just kind of walking and doing like easy kind of things. Then I moved up to Sheffield, which is the Peak District, which is a place which hasn't got many peaks in it at all. It's kind of a bad, it sounds cool, but it's not very peaky. And I got a job in a shop. And one day I was like looking at I saw this guidebook, and it was for climbing in the Alps. And the same week, an article came out about climbing the Alps in the wintertime. So I suddenly had this idea of wanting to go to the Alps in the wintertime, and you get a bus, and the bus was only, it was like 99 quid to go on this bus all the way to the Alps. And I was getting paid about £100 a week. So it was like I had £1 left over. And I just, for some reason, I gave my job up as well, which was a bit stupid, because I only went for 2 weeks. But so I got this, I went with a guy I met at a barbecue, and I didn't really know him very well, but he'd been to the Alps before. We went out to the Alps, and we had this really terrible trip, really. It was like the middle of winter. There was no climbers around, and we basically flailed around in the mountains. But it was the first time I ever really experienced, first time we went on a glacier or saw like really proper, like 1,000-meter high mountains. And although I didn't climb anything, I really felt like there was that real sense of going into somewhere incredibly hostile, because it was so cold. And that was like super exciting. Being on a glacier, it felt like because I read all these comics as a kid. I really felt I was really into science fiction, and this was like going to a different planet, like being on a glacier in like at midnight, you know, with the wind blowing and the darkness. It was like being on an alien planet. So I think that was something that really made me enjoy it. So when I came back from that trip, I ended up getting a job in another climbing shop with a guy called Dick Turnbull, he'd actually written an article that inspired me to go in the first place. And he'd climbed the North Face, the Eiger in winter, and the Grand Jurassic in winter, and the Matterhorn in winter. So I ended up going with him the second time. And luckily we didn't climb anything because I had no experience whatsoever, and I don't think he realized that. But I was very ambitious, like obviously very ambitious to go with someone like that. And I just didn't tell him I didn't know anything. And then, so luckily we tried to climb the North Face to Drew, but luckily we didn't, so I would have died. And then on the third trip to the Alps, I ended up climbing this thing, the Frendo Spare, which is it's a classic. It's like 1,200 meters high. I can't think of an equivalent in America. Maybe like the East Buttress of Mount Whitney or something. And because it was in the winter time, it was all covered in snow. And it took us the first attempt. We climbed up. We spent all day climbing up it, and we probably got like 400 meters up it. And in the night, I managed to drop my boot, trying to get it off. So I remember Steve House dropped his boot off a bivvy as well, so that's good to see. So yeah, trying to get my boot off, and I dropped the boot, and it fell down the top of the face. And then then a serac broke off above us at exactly the same moment, and we were right on the side of the spare. And it was the first time in my life I thought I was going to die, because the sound of a serac when you're underneath it is kind of scary. And yeah, so this serac started crashing down, and so it was the first time I ever went onto the death scale, I call it, the death spectrum, where it begins with like, I think I'm going to die, and it's like, I'm going to die, and I'm going to die, and then I'm dead. So yeah, so in this moment, it was we didn't die. Like the serac came crashing past us and all around us, and we didn't die. And it was a really amazing moment. But I decided I was never going to go climbing again. I was never going to go alpine climbing again. It was way too dangerous, way too serious. So we decided to. The next morning, I put like a mitten on my foot, and I tied the crampon on with a prusik loop, and we abseiled down. And we only had one rope, because I always used to read these articles by Mark Twight, and he only ever had one rope, and I thought it was kind of cool. So I never realized he had another rope in his rucksack. But anyway, so we had to do these like 25-meter abseils and go down to the bottom of the face and ran away. And as I was running over all the debris from the serac, I found my boot, and the boot was just sitting there on the ice, and it was like it was like a sign, that I had to go back and had to keep climbing. So we went down for a few days, and then we went back, and we spent 4 days on the Frendo, and it was like, in a way, like someone said that the Frendo begins quite easy and gets harder and harder and harder, and it only goes up to, it's like 5, 6 or something near the top, because it was like covered in snow, and it was like the weather wasn't very good. It kind of taught me so much about alpine climbing. Like I really knew nothing about alpine climbing at the beginning, but having climbed 1,200 meters of this thing, it was teaching me so much. But it was so intense. Like I really didn't enjoy it. I just found it really, really, really tough and like desperate. And on the very last day, like I ended up falling off, and I think I might have broken my ribs. And anyway, it was a disaster. But on the very last day, we were climbing up, and it got dark, and this storm came in, and the storm started blowing all the snow from the Italian side down on top of us. And I went into this kind of trance-like state where all I could think about was, like, if either of us fell, we would pull the other one off, and we'd fall 1,000 meters down the mountain. And I remember just being in this like trance-like state, just climbing and just focusing on not falling off. And then when we got to the top, we staggered up to the telefreak station, and we like banged on the doors and managed to get in there. And it was so intense that Aaron, who was my climbing partner, he never really climbed again. And although I really didn't enjoy the experience, it was the only thing I'd ever did where it actually seemed to make any sense, really, in my whole life, really. And my whole life kind of changed from that moment. In that, probably the most profound thing about it was when I came back, it was such an intense experience. I felt like I had to write about it, but I really couldn't write anything. I had no idea how to write. and someone actually given us a really old computer. So I started trying to write this story about the friendo spare, and I wrote it and wrote it and wrote it, and I was so ignorant that things I could highlight everything and I'd press back and it would all delete or something. I didn't realize you could just get it back again. You could like undo changes. So then I would start again, and then I'd have it on a floppy disk, and I'd lose a floppy disk, and I'd start again. And I was married to a teacher, so that was kind of lucky. So she was trying to help me, which was like, she was kind of a tough, she was very tough on me though. She's like, this is terrible. This is like really terrible writing. So after about 2 years, I've eventually finished this bit of writing. And I ended up, it shows when it was, I actually faxed it to Climbing Magazine in America. And I remember I went to work and faxed this thing. It was called Broken Promises. And when I came into sort of work the following morning, was this fax from Alison Oasius saying, we really love this, we're gonna print it. And so that was like a really life-changing moment. So the Climb the Friendo was like a really life-changing, extreme adventure, but then writing about it was much more extreme. And that one piece of writing probably led into eventually writing Psychovertical and Cold Wars. This is a picture of me winning an award in Italy for like the translation. I didn't do the translation of Psychovertical, and yeah. So now there's this person who's like pretty illiterate. There's like books in, I think I have books in like Korean and German, French, Italian, all these Polish, all these different languages. So it's kind of I think maybe the thing about writing, it's a little bit like alpine climbing. It's that kind of persistence of just of not giving in and just keeping going. And when people say what you're doing is rubbish and you're not very good at it, you just have to ignore them and keep trying. And I guess ambition, like being an ambitious person is very important as a climber and as a writer. If you're not ambitious, I don't know I guess you're doing it for fun. But for me, like writing and climbing was never really about fun. It was always about something else. And I guess that is why the kind of climbing I chose to do, like I kept going back to the Alps, and eventually we climbed soloed some quite hard things in the Alps. Climbed the La Faye route on the west face of the Drew, which at the time was like the hardest big wall in Europe. Apparently, I think it still only had like 2 more ascents since then. And but it was a really amazing place to learn about climbing in the Alps and the cost of it all, really. And then from there I went off to climb in Yosemite, and I guess I've been to Yosemite. I had like a big gap of about 10 years, but I've probably been to Yosemite once or twice, like every year, really. And slowly sort of fell in love with Yosemite. I sort of like totally fall in love with climbing in America in general, and America, kind of. America gets really hard. It gets a hard time, but I think America's like an amazing place. So yeah, so climbing in Yosemite, that taught me a lot of skills about commitment. Like when you're an alpine climber, people often have this thing like, oh, you're so there's no way you can abseil down off this. We're so committed. But when you've been on a big wall and it's like 1,000 meters high, and you've managed to get down off that, you realize that alpine climbers don't really know anything about steepness or commitment and things. And so climbing in Yosemite, and then the mixture of climbing Yosemite, climbing in the Alps in the wintertime, I guess I put those together, and I ended up going to Patagonia like 5 times, 4 times in the wintertime, and then 1 time on like a kayaking trip in the fjords in the north of Patagonia in Chile. And I guess again, the Patagonia added like another element of like in the winter there's no one there, so you're very isolated. It feels very committing, and I quite like the cold. Again, like growing up in that block of flats was very handy. And then from there went off climbing in like Norway. I've been to Alaska. Went to the Ruth Gorge in the wintertime, climbing on the Troll Wall, and eventually ended up like climbing in Antarctica. This is a photograph here. Is climbing on Ulvatana. This was like a new route on Ulvatana, which your man Conrad Anker and Jimmy Chin did a route on there this year, and they sort of finished up our route. So yeah, so it's kind of it's kind of an interesting journey as a climber to go from like kind of living on this council estate, you know, unemployed, on welfare, not the normal kind of way that most climbers I know got into climbing. They kind of went to university and they met other climbers, and they slowly, you know, their parents were big into climbing, they lived in the mountains. Where my kind of entry into the mountains is a little bit different to anybody else I know, really. But I think it means you have like a slightly different relationship to mountains. In that, I think, like I said about have a relationship with words. Like words mean a lot more if you never really got a grasp of them when you were younger. And maybe it's the same with mountains as well. Like mountains, if you grow up in a very flat area, like mountains have like a real amazing, you know, it's like growing up like in the UK. We have a lot of schools which are just for boys and schools for girls. So if you grow up in a school with no girls, like women for the rest of your life, they kind of terrify you, and you know they're like something. There's something mysterious about women that maybe if you grew up in a school with you know, boys and girls, you won't have that. So it's yeah. So I think it's quite a good thing. So I guess am I running out of time here? Am I supposed to talk for half an hour? So I'm afraid some of these slides are very very obscure. I have no idea what they're doing in here, but I don't believe in planning things too much. So yeah, so the book, 1,000 Climbing Tips. So this was actually quite a project. It didn't actually take that long. I was kind of surprised how like I saw a book on Kindle and it was 100 climbing tips, and I thought, like, I'm sure I could write more than 100 climbing tips. So I tried to write 100 a day. So technically, it only took me 10 days to write this book, which would be kind of typical. If this book is, you can buy it all over the place, like in Italian, Spanish, French. But it'd be typical, like if a book that only took you 10 days becomes the book that you're most well known for. But yeah, so I was like, I just tried to basically go into my brain and just kind of strip mine it for every little tiny detail, you know, like big things and small things that I thought would be interesting to climbers. But like mainly it was all the things I wish I would have known when I was like, you know, starting to climb. So maybe like learning all these, learning the easy way, you know, from what someone else is telling you rather than the hardware. So I don't know what this slide's for here. So all right. So yeah. So I think in the end, when the book was finished, I think it was like 1,015 tips. So I had to get rid of some of them were duplicates. But yeah, I actually quite. When you write, sometimes you're almost like writing a trance. You're just writing and writing and writing and writing, and you have you don't even know what you're writing at all. It's just kind of channeling it from somewhere inside you, from your subconscious. I don't think I've actually ever read any of the tips until the book was like published, and then I'd like sit on the toilet and I'd read it, and some of them made me laugh because it was some of them are yeah, some of them are really good, and some of them are really stupid. Some of them are funny. Some of them could make a big difference, I think. So yeah, it's kind of so I guess it's like I think it's on Amazon at the moment. It has a lot of it's got a lot of 5 stars. A lot of people really love this book, and it has a few people who are like, oh, I've heard all these tips before. But I always think, like, if a book like it's got 1,000 tips and it has maybe one really amazing tip, and it costs you the same price as a couple of coffees at Starbucks, then I think that's kind of good value in my mind. But then I wrote the book, so I would say that. So I guess I'll wrap it up. I know I've not really been pushing the book. I'm not a big pushing book kind of person, but yeah, I think a lot of people will enjoy this book. It's got a lot of density to it. It's very hard. It's a very heavy book. I have a box with them. I have to carry around when I'm like gigging, and they're the most heaviest books I have. So if that's a sign of quality, then yeah, they're pretty heavy. So yeah. Anyway, so we'll go over to the questions.
Okay, Andy, thanks. Hey, we all learn a lot from our mistakes. So, what's a tip from the book that you learned as a result of a critical situation? Any of those spring to mind?
All right. The thing in the book that always sticks in my mind. It's a really little thing. It's like always put your water bottles in your pack upside down, so the ice forms on the bottom, not on the top where the lid is, which is such a stupid little thing. But we've all done that thing, and we have like a Nalgene bottle, and we open it, and there's ice in the lid, and we can't drink the water, and the water's on the inside. So that's like a really small one. There's quite a lot of things in the book about like expeditions, like if people are going to like Denali or whatever, about trying to maintain, trying to look after yourself. You know, like when you meet people who've been in the army, like people who've been in the army are really good at looking after themselves, and people who haven't are often not very good at all. And so I think yeah, like being able to look after your little things, like being able to look after your socks and being able to look after your I'll just put on my webcam, being able to put on your oops, I'm trying the webcam, share my webcam.
There he is. We see you.
Oh God. So I'll have to explain that my computer's broken, so I'm looking on 2 different screens. So yeah, like it's like little tiny things. Like I've been to places where I think when we went to the Ruth Gorge, I think it got down to like -50, which is quite cold. But -50 isn't as bad as -5. I think that the colder it is, like when you go to Antarctica, people think it's going to be really cold, and it is like super cold, but it's not. The cold isn't the problem. So it's that kind of weird, you know, like I've climbed in the Adirondacks, places like that, where that kind of environment is kind of much more extreme because it's not like super cold. Where in Antarctica, the problem is how hot it is in a way. Like when you're in your tent at -30, when the sun's shining on it, it's actually really roastingly hot, and you're in your underpants. But as soon as a shadow comes over you, then it goes down to -30 like immediately. So there's a lot of tips in there about looking after yourself, looking out of your tent, like using brushes to keep snow out of everything, using little tiny brushes to get all the velvet. Like if you're bivouacking and you get into your sleeping bag, you need to get rid of all the snow that are on your clothing so it doesn't melt into your sleeping bag. Drying your socks, drying your gloves every day. You begin with like dry gear, stuff like vapor barrier socks. Loads of little tiny things that make a massive difference. Like a few years ago, I skied across Greenland, and I'd never really done a trip like that before. It sounded a bit boring. It was a bit boring, but it was good as well. But I remember I had like a sick bag for some reason from the plane, and a little bit of a pencil. And every day I would write down all these little things I learned when I was skiing across Greenland. And a lot of them are like really simple, like simple little things that make a massive difference when you're on an expedition. Like even little things like if you're using, it's like it's a no-brainer once you know it, but when you're using skis to secure a tent in the snow, like you always want the edges on the inside facing the tent, otherwise they cut the cord. And things like using bamboo, like lengths of bamboo don't weigh anything, but they're really good for securing a tent in the snow, rather than buying expensive like MSR kind of tent pegs and loads of little things. Like sometimes you go places where the density of the ground is so hard that you can't build a wall to keep the wind off you, which is gonna, you know, if you get a big storm, you're gonna get like no tent is strong enough to withstand a storm. So this thing about using those big refuge bags that they put concrete in, like using those and filling them with snow is a good idea, or you know, improvising walls. So yeah, so I guess there's a lot of things in there which seem like not very important, but when you go to like a mountain or you go on an ice cap or something, you maybe realize it's the little tiny details that really, you know, it's not about how good your Gore-Tex is or what kind of tent you've got. It's often a really tiny thing, like digging a hole for your feet to go in the front of a tent on a mountain, means that all the cold air goes down into that hole, and if your stove sets on fire, you can throw it down the hole as well, which is kind of kind of a very handy. It could like save you, save your whole trip rather than thinking about spending hours thinking about what tent you should buy, really.
Okay. Well, we have a couple of questions from John's, and one John asks, what are your top 3 pieces of kit for El Cap that most other climbers do not bring, or maybe unconventional, or perhaps overlooked?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I don't know, like I always think if you're going to climb El Cap, I think what a lot of people make the mistake of they set themselves a very high. They think they have to be really, really good, and they always they underestimate how bad they'll be. So as soon as they're like if you're going to climb the nose, for example, the first 3 pitches of the nose are the hardest pitches on the nose. So a lot of people like turn up and they really struggle, and you think, I wanted to climb this in 2 days, and it's taking me all day to climb these 3 pitches. I can't do it, and then they end up bailing back down again. And it's often little things. Like I always carry a bird beak, because often I found it's like in a piece of like a sky hook and a bird beak. These 2 things that when you're ever in the mountains, they can often get you out of a very, very tricky situation. And on the first, I think it's like the 3rd pitch of the nose, maybe there's a bit where it gets very, very blank. And I've climbed the nose in like the winter time where you couldn't just free climb up there. And I remember like using the bird beak just to hook into a little tiny little bit of a stub of an old peg or something. So in any situation, it's often like if everything seems completely desperate, what are you going to use? How are we going to get out of the situation? Often it's a bird beak or a sky hook. Like even on the nose on the Lynn Hill Traverse, it's like 10D or something. And when I did it in the winter time, I just had my like approach shoes on, because it was kind of quite cold. It was a very icy, lots of ice kind of falling down. And there's a bit at the end of the 10D Traverse where you have to. So it's like 10D and there's bolts. It's not like you can't like aid yourself across it. You have to climb like 10D. And there's a bit where I end up having to like put the sky hook I always carry, put the sky hook on a little edge, and managed to get like a nut in or something and climbed it. So yeah. So I'd say like a pointed black diamond grappling hook is a good thing to always carry, no matter how easy it is, and a bird beak, something like a Moses, like a tomahawk, something. And the other thing, what else would I always bring? Like never take a book. Like I've climbed El Cap with so many people, and they always think I'll take a book. I don't think I've ever read a single page of a book on El Cap. This never seems to be a big thing. I quite like it. I think because I'm British, I always take a stove. I always quite like a cup of tea. I don't know. That's a very British thing. Like I've never taken. We did take some wine once. That was kind of good. But it's probably like patience, isn't it? Like that's a good thing to take on a big wall. Is taking your time. Like it's amazing. There's always a way. No matter how desperate it seems, there's always a way on. Can't really think what I would take. I always try and the main thing I always take is like I always take more water. I think last time when I soloed El Cap last time, I think I was up there for like 16 days, and I took like a crazy amount of water. Like after 16 days, I still had about 10 liters of water left. I had to pour it all out. So I think I often think it's good to have. Like food doesn't really matter, but water is like really, really important. And just taking your time, I think is really important. To not think if you're going to do the nose, like you should think you're going to take 5 days and take 6 days of water. If you think you're going to take you 2 days, it'll probably take you longer than that anyway. So it's horrible when you're halfway up a route and you're like, we have to go down because we're running out of something. To hold 5 days isn't that much difficult than holding 3 days of water. So yeah, I can't think of what else. I always take really good storm gear. Like I've been caught in. When I tried to climb Tangerine Trip in a day, and it ended up taking us like 3 days, and we had to bivvy. I had to sleep on a belay seat for 2 nights, and the guy I was with had to sleep on a hammock, just like clipped into a bolt, and we had one sleeping bag. So one person got the bivvy bag, one person got the sleeping bag, and I remember. It was like we got caught in a big storm, like with snow and everything else. So ever since then, I've always taken like really good like storm gear. But then last year, I climbed the nose and climbed Dawn Wall to the nose, and there's a big storm was coming, was forecast, and I got to the top of El Cap, and then Vanessa, my wife, was just Jumaring up underneath the lip, and the whole bag got stuck, and she abseiled down so the whole bag was maybe 3 meters from the top of El Cap, and she abseiled down to get it, and then just from nowhere this storm just appeared, and the rain and the wind just came from nowhere, and within 5 minutes there was a waterfall like pouring down over the top of the wall, down directly on top of her, and by the time she got up and managed to pull the whole bag up, like she was like almost hypothermic, and luckily I'd said, because I knew the storm was coming, I was like, you have to everyone put the waterproof jackets on, so, but then like the water just rushes through your sleeves, and so we had like some of the best gear you could have in that situation. But even then, like when we got to the top, we were so soaking wet. It was like midnight, everything's wet, and you kind of have to crawl into the portal edge fly sheet, use that as a tent. And you got we had synthetic sleeping bags, and they were wet, and you just think like if we wake up in the morning and there's snow everywhere, we're really kind of screwed here. It's going to be super grim because your socks, trainers, everything is wet. And luckily we woke up and the sun shone for about 2 hours, enough to like dry enough stuff for us to we had to walk all the way down we walked all the way down the falls trail because there's so much snow everywhere. I didn't want to go down the slabs. So yes, that made me think. That's the one thing a lot of people don't seem to take, is like really good storm gear. So I always imagine I'm going to climb like the North Face of the Eiger in the wintertime. I always like go prepared for the absolute worst situation possible. So
okay. Hey, we got another question from another Don, and it says, do you have any advice for pursuing a career in the mountains?
I think becoming a mountain guide is a really good way of doing it. Like if you feel like you love climbing and you kind of like people, and you want to combine the two, I think being a mountain guide is a really good career. And I think there's the European idea of like paying someone to take you climbing or take you to the mountains is we're living in an incredibly risk averse society that's becoming more and more risk averse, where unless you're qualified or you have steel toe caps on or a helmet, you can't do anything. So the need for mountain guides and the need for people qualified to do dangerous stuff is increasing rapidly. So I think being a mountain guide is a really good job, and it's not as difficult as people think. It's like people think it's like becoming like a US Navy SEAL or something. Like if you just have to be fit, you have to be really motivated, you have to put in a lot of time. And I think most people could become a mountain guide if they're young and they're like they've got some, they kind of enjoy that kind of thing. Otherwise, I often tell people, get a career, like young climbers, like get a career which is very flexible, where you can work anywhere. Like modern jobs are kind of, web related jobs, kind of interesting. You can, like I've been like in a kayak in the middle of nowhere, and I've been like doing things on my phone, like sitting in the kayak and pretending people think I'm at work, but I'm actually not. So I think that kind of the modern ways of working are really good ways of being in the outdoors and still kind of making a living, and maybe like look at your life. Like I own very little. I'm not a very successful person if you're going to judge me on how much I own. But I have had like a lot of freedom in my life to do whatever I wanted to do, and I guide someone who is literally a billionaire. But I am a lot richer than he is. Like he has no time, or I have all this time in the world. So when when we finish climbing something, he has to go off and go back to work or do other things, where I can just keep doing what I want to do. So I think John Turk, who wrote Cold Oceans, he called it like a millionaire's lifestyle. You know, if you own your climbing equipment and you have somewhere really cheap to live and you have enough gas and you know, don't worry about pensions and old age. Just you know, that's what suicide's for. Then you can kind of balance the two really, but you just have to have a very old school climbing. You know, like don't spend loads of money on anything. Spend all your money on experiences, not on stuff. So don't have an iPhone 10. Just have like a really. And in the US you can't. You're not on 2G in the US. In the UK you can buy. You know, I think I bought like a $24 phone in the US. You know, have that rather than a $1,000 phone. Then you've got like nearly $1,000 to go climbing as much as you want. Yeah, but I think you have to be careful. If you make a career out of climbing, it can ruin it for you, because it just becomes a job. So you know, be careful what you wish for, really.
Okay, hey, thanks a lot, Andy. We got a couple more questions, but we're going to email those to you so you can just and with the emails of the folks that asked them, and you can respond to them, because we got to wrap it up now. We really appreciate everybody who joined us today. If you'd like to buy one of Andy's books, 1001 Climbing Tips, Psycho Vertical, or Cold Wars, you can get a 20% discount on them at mountaineersbooks.org when you use the code TIPSY, TIPSY, at checkout. So that's TIPSY, TIPSY, at checkout, and you'll get 20% off. And you can also find Andy's books wherever books are sold. So you don't need to just come to our website. Our next web event, if we get a slide up on that, is going to be with this group of women. They're known as Dirty Gourmet Gals. They have a website and they do a lot of training for outdoor cooking. That's their specialty. All the food that I've tried is really outstanding, and they're going to do a seminar on campfire cooking. So if you're staging your climbs close to the car and want to eat really well after a long day on the crags, you can get great tasting, healthy, nutritious tips from the women of Dirty Gourmet. They're going to be with us in mid-April 18, and so we hope to see you back then. So long, and have a great day. Thanks.
That's off.
Well, I hear you. I'm not sure if everybody else has left the event or not.
Sorry, at the beginning, like when the slideshow came in, I couldn't.
So everyone's still on, but they're slowly logging out. But I'm gonna start logging people off. So and see if that works.
Yeah, Marcus saying he hears us. The ending part is where we could use some more skills.
You should write something, say something really profound. About the Illuminati or something. Oh yeah. Oh, it's still being recorded. But